I want you to think about something for just a moment before we dive in. Think about the last time you walked away from a conversation and felt that quiet, uncomfortable feeling that something was missing. Not that anything went wrong exactly. Not that you said something offensive or made an obvious mistake. Just that the whole thing felt flat, ordinary, like you were both going through the motions of a script that neither of you wrote, but somehow both already knew by heart. Where are you from? What do you do? How was your weekend? Polite? Safe. Forgettable? And you walked away thinking, why did that feel so empty? Why didn't something real happen there? Now think about the opposite experience. Think about a time, maybe rarer than you'd like, when a conversation felt genuinely alive, when the energy shifted in a way you could actually feel, when she leaned in slightly, when her eyes changed, when the pace of the whole exchange slowed down in a comfortable way that felt like something meaningful was unfolding between two people. And the fascinating thing about that second kind of conversation is that if you try to identify exactly what made it different, most people can't quite put their finger on it. It wasn't anything dramatic. Nobody said anything earth-shattering. There were no grand gestures or perfectly crafted speeches. Something just felt different. The atmosphere changed. And that change, that invisible shift from ordinary to genuinely interesting, is exactly what we're going to talk about today. Because here is what most men have never been told about attraction and conversation. It is not about what you say. It is about what she feels while you're saying it. Two men can walk into the same conversation, cover essentially the same topics, say things that are objectively similar in content, and one conversation creates real connection while the other quietly fades the moment it ends. Not because of looks. Not because of status. Not because one man is more articulate than the other, but because of something far more subtle and far more powerful than any of that. The emotional atmosphere one man creates versus the one the other man doesn't even realize is missing. And once you understand how that atmosphere is built, and specifically the 3 conversational tools that shape it most powerfully, you will never approach a conversation the same way again. But before I get into those 3 tools, I want to address something that I think is at the heart of why so many conversations fail before they ever really begin. Most men approach conversations with a woman they're attracted to as a kind of performance. They're thinking about what to say next while she's still speaking. They're scanning for impressive stories to share, trying to appear confident, trying to seem interesting. And the problem with all of that is not the intention behind it. The intention is fine. The problem is that performance and presence are opposites. You cannot be fully present in a conversation while simultaneously running a performance in your head. And presence, genuine, grounded, unhurried presence, is the foundation of everything else we're going to talk about today. It's the soil that all of this grows in. Without it, the techniques fall flat. With it, even simple words carry weight. So let's talk about the first tool, and this one is built on one of the most powerful forces in human psychology: curiosity. The brain has a very specific response to unfinished ideas. When we sense that something is incomplete, when a thought or a story is left slightly open, our mind instinctively leans forward. It wants closure. It searches for the missing piece. You've experienced this yourself. Someone starts telling you something and then gets interrupted or pauses for a moment, and suddenly your attention sharpens in a way it wasn't sharp before. That's the brain responding to open loops, to unanswered questions, to the sense that something hasn't fully revealed itself yet. Now here's how you use that principle naturally in a conversation. Imagine she shares something about herself. A hobby she loves, a memory from her past, something about her personality that she lets slip into the conversation. Instead of responding with a standard comment or immediately relating it back to yourself, you say something simple and unexpected. Something like, "You remind me of someone," and then you pause for just a second. And then you add lightly, "Actually, never mind," and you continue the conversation as if the thought just drifted away. You don't stare at her. You don't linger on it. You just move forward naturally. What happens in her mind at that moment is immediate and powerful. Who did he mean? Why did he stop? What was he going to say? That small, unfinished thought begins circling. And the most interesting part is what tends to happen later. She comes back to it. She smiles and says, "Wait, who did I remind you of earlier?" And when that moment arrives, you reveal something thoughtful. Not about her appearance, not something superficial, but a genuine observation about her character. Something like, "You reminded me of someone I know who has this way of making people feel genuinely at ease. When you were talking about that earlier, I noticed something similar in you." And in that moment, the conversation transforms. She doesn't feel noticed in the way she's felt noticed 100 times before. She feels recognized, seen beyond the surface. And that feeling is one of the deepest emotional triggers of genuine attraction that exists. The second tool is the compliment. And I know what you're thinking. Compliments are obvious. Everyone knows about compliments. But here's the thing. Almost every man uses compliments in a way that produces the exact opposite of the intended effect. And the reason is simple. Attractive women hear the same compliments on repeat. You're beautiful. You have incredible eyes. You look amazing. And each time those words land, they create less impact than the time before. Not because the woman is cold or ungrateful, but because the brain stops registering what it hears constantly. It becomes background noise. It loses emotional signal. But a compliment rooted in genuine observation cuts through that noise immediately, because it shows something that standard flattery never does. It shows that you are actually paying attention, not to how she looks, but to who she is, to how she thinks, to how she moves through an interaction. Something like the way you explained that was genuinely clear and thoughtful, or you have this calm way of making people around you feel comfortable. I noticed that. And pay attention to what those compliments are actually doing. They're not praising her appearance. They're acknowledging her character, her behavior, who she actually is underneath how she looks. And when someone is appreciated for their character instead of their surface, the emotional impact is in a completely different category. There's an even more powerful version of this. When you notice something subtle about how she interacts with others, maybe she makes sure quieter people in the group feel included. Maybe she listens carefully before she speaks in a world where most people are already preparing their response before the other person has finished talking. Most people never receive compliments for that kind of social awareness. So when you say, I noticed earlier that you made sure everyone had a chance to speak, that's not something most people think to do. It lands in a way that changes how she sees you, because it tells her that you see her in a way most people don't. And feeling genuinely seen is one of the most quietly powerful experiences one person can offer another. One important note on timing with this. If the compliment arrives too quickly before any real exchange has happened, it can feel overwhelming or calculated. Let the conversation breathe first. Let something real emerge between you, and then offer the observation at a moment that feels natural. Attraction grows best in comfortable light, not under an intense spotlight. The third tool is what I'd call selective honesty. And most people misunderstand what creates genuine intrigue in a conversation. They think mystery means withholding. They think being interesting means being strategically vague or hard to read. But real intrigue doesn't come from silence or evasion. It comes from revealing something slightly unexpected about yourself. A small quirk, a rare opinion, a harmless admission of something imperfect. Because here's what that kind of honesty signals at a psychological level. It signals security. Only a person who is genuinely comfortable with themselves can admit their imperfections without apology. And that contrast between what she expected and what she actually encountered creates real curiosity about who you are. For example, she asks what you enjoy doing in your free time. Instead of giving the safe, predictable answer, you say something like, I have this strange habit actually. I like going on long walks with no music, no podcast, just complete silence. Most people think that's a little odd. That moment opens something. It reveals real personality. It shifts her expectations slightly. And when expectations shift, curiosity returns. She begins wanting to understand you more. She's no longer in an interview. She's in a conversation that feels like there might be more to discover. And that feeling, the feeling that there is still more to know about you, is one of the most compelling forces in human attraction. Now, there's a fourth conversational move I want to add here because it ties everything together. And it's something most people never think of as a tool at all. It's the playful question reversal. Most conversations follow a predictable rhythm. Question, answer, question, answer. And after a while, that rhythm turns an interaction into something that feels more like an interview than a genuine exchange. Both people feel it even if neither says anything about it. But when you gently break that rhythm, something shifts immediately. When she asks you a personal question, instead of answering immediately, you smile lightly and say, "What do you think?" And that simple reversal does something fascinating inside the human brain. It invites her imagination into the conversation. Suddenly, she's not just asking questions. She's participating in creating the exchange. She starts guessing. She starts observing you more closely. And through her guess, she reveals something about her own values, her own perceptions, the way she's been reading you. The conversation becomes collaborative instead of one-sided. It becomes something both of you are building together, rather than something one person is performing for the other. The key with this one is balance. Use it sparingly. If every question gets reversed back to her, it starts feeling evasive rather than playful. But used at the right moment with a relaxed smile and genuine curiosity, it completely shifts the energy of the interaction in a way that's hard to define but immediately felt. Now, I want to bring all of this back to the one principle that runs through everything we've talked about today. Because the phrases and tools matter, but they only work when they're grounded in something deeper. And that something is presence. Real, unhurried, genuine presence. When you are truly present in a conversation, something changes automatically. You notice details you would have missed while planning your next sentence. You hear the tone behind the words, not just the words themselves. You catch the small moments, the brief pause before she answers something, the way her energy shifts when a topic actually interests her, the things she almost says but doesn't quite. And those observations allow you to respond in ways that feel genuinely connected rather than rehearsed. The people who create the strongest attraction in conversation are rarely the ones trying hardest to create it. They're the ones who are simply comfortable being themselves while genuinely paying attention to the person in front of them. They listen. They respond with real intention. They allow the conversation to unfold at its own pace rather than pushing it towards some predetermined destination. And that combination, that quality of calm, curious, unhurried presence, feels so rare in today's world that when someone carries it, it stands out immediately. Not loudly, not obviously, but powerfully. So here's what I want you to actually do with this. This week, choose just one of these ideas. Not all four, just one. Bring it into a real conversation naturally and observe what happens. Does something shift? Does the energy change? Does the conversation last longer or go somewhere it wouldn't have otherwise gone? Because reflection builds real social skill far faster than theory ever will. And as you practice, as each conversation gives you feedback rather than judgment, something starts to change from the inside. Your presence becomes more natural. Silence becomes more comfortable. You stop chasing approval and start genuinely enjoying the exchange. And enjoyment, real enjoyment of the conversation for its own sake, is one of the most magnetic qualities a person can carry. People are drawn towards someone who is genuinely at ease in their own presence. Remember this as you go. You don't need perfect words. You don't need a perfect script. You need awareness, genuine curiosity, and the willingness to be fully present. Let your words reflect real attention. Let your compliments reflect actual observation. Let your curiosity invite something deeper. When those things align, conversations stop feeling like effort and start feeling like discovery. And discovery is one of the most genuinely attractive experiences two people can share. If this gave you something real today, let me know in the comments which of these ideas stood out most to you. I read every single one. And if you haven't subscribed yet, join us here because this is exactly the kind of conversation we have every week. Real psychology, real insights, built around one simple belief. When presence replaces performance, people feel it immediately. And that feeling is what quietly draws them closer.